Alright, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Tokenicer, and I'm here to bring you guys in-depth news, analysis, and insights from the digital asset space, along with covering the progressive tokenization of the world. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button to help with the algorithm, while also checking out Tokenicer.network for all my content platforms linked right in one spot. From my Twitter threads, Medium articles, Spotify podcasts, YouTube videos, interviews, and so much more. And as always, that'll be linked right down in the description below. So in today's video, we're going to be doing an introduction into Casper Network. This is another Layer 1 project that a bunch of people in my close circle who I really respect have been talking about for quite some time now. And so of course, I had to go and give it a look myself. And well, I was quite impressed with the project overall. Usually when I see another Layer 1, I'm a little bit skeptical just because of the abundance of them on the market. I mean, there's probably hundreds of them from projects like Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, Cardano, Polkadot, Cosmos, Algorand, Zinfin, VeChain, Hedera, IOTA, Tron. And that was literally just off the top of my head. I know for a fact that there's probably at least another few dozens that I missed. But when I looked into Casper, I was really impressed with how the team was built out, their wide array of operations, their flexibility and customization, the connections to massive entities out there, and much more. And so, as always, just before we get started, I just gotta remind everyone real quick that I'm not a financial advisor, and therefore please don't take anything you hear or read from me as any form of financial or investment advice. But now that we got that out of the way, let's get right into it. So, as stated, Casper Protocol is another Layer 1 network that's public and permissionless. Meaning, much like Ethereum or Solana, they're sort of the base blockchain layer for developers of all levels, whether it's just retail or large enterprises to build applications on. Though what separates Casper from the rest of the pack is that they're an enterprise-grade focused blockchain, meaning it's built for actual businesses to build applications on versus, say, something like Solana, which has largely been used to build retail applications on for things such as art-based NFTs and DeFi protocols. For example, they've built an NFT-based chain of custody for tracing public patent records so they can be traded, licensed, and overall just track the provenance of these patents better, which is something that really just makes sense as the current patent industry is quite a mess at the moment. And having the immutable data of a blockchain can really help with tracing these patents and further enabling the ability to license them in a trustless and automated manner. So again, they are fundamentally another Layer 1, which runs on proof of stake, like many of these other Layer 1s on the market. But there's a little catch to this, as they've built some augmentations to their consensus. They have a function called CBC Casper. This is short for Correct by Construction, and it's actually what even Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin himself has come out saying and backing, and this was researched by Vlad Zamfir from the Ethereum Foundation, which he also helped finalize and complete the research with Casper Labs on. And so Casper is actually the first network with a full functioning complete form of CBC Casper. And while it is called CBC Casper, it's not actually directly affiliated with Casper per se. Casper does have their own version of this, which they call the Highway Consensus, and it's basically an improvement to what the original version of CBC Casper was. In short, it's the most secure consensus protocol for proof of stake, ensuring that the network is Byzantine fault tolerant. I'm not going to go too far in depth into the consensus and tech behind CBC Casper, as it's quite a rabbit hole in itself, and I believe it's more suited to save that for when we do the deep dive. But the 2 points of focus within CBC Casper is the safety of the protocol, meaning that it won't make inconsistent decisions, and also the liveness of the network, meaning the protocol is active and will eventually make a decision, aka reach finality. So within finality, Byzantine fault tolerance comes into play a fair bit, and I've explained what Byzantine fault tolerance is a few times in some of the projects that also have this focus in mind, such as LF0 and Hedera Hashgraph, with the analogy of the attacking armies and the large empire. And while finality is a rather self-explanatory term, right? It basically just means when the network has finalized a decision, most cases a transaction. So in a more literal context in the blockchain space, classic Byzantine fault tolerance would allow for finality as long as 2/3 of the network is being honest and reaches consensus, which is a binary way to achieving finality, meaning that it's either a simple yes or no answer. Either the network has reached finality or it hasn't. It's very black and white. However, Casper's highway consensus has taken a different approach to this, as their way of reaching finality is a lot more dynamic and expressive. And the way they've done so is almost similar to a way of horizontal scalability, to where the more honest acting validators there are, the higher the finality rate will be. And as stated, in a traditional system, finality is reached when 2/3 of validators are acting honestly. Whereas with highway consensus, it still has this factor. But once there's over 2/3 of the network acting honestly or in agreement, the finality rate will actually be higher than if it was just close or exactly 2/3 of the network. And with the incentivization and punishment structure of being slashed within most of these proof of stake mechanisms, it does kind of make sense that the majority would be acting honestly, which in returns means that Casper's highway consensus is much more robust and stronger when it comes to reaching finality during periods where over 2/3 of the network is operating honestly. And along with this, the highway consensus is very flexible, as the finality would be a variable rate depending on the validators. Each validator node will have to agree on a threshold for finality in each period, but here's the catch. These nodes don't all have to agree on a single specific threshold. Instead, they can each use different finality thresholds. This opens tons of potential opportunities for things like, say, nodes playing different roles in the Casper ecosystem. So for example, let's say some nodes are responsible for smaller basic transactions, which would probably have much lower thresholds than, say, for example, nodes that are responsible for validating larger transactions that may be for business-related purposes. Those transactions would probably value the safety more than the speed and latency than smaller transactions would. And so you can almost think of this as an upgrade from our legacy infrastructure of real-time gross settlements in low and high-value payments, which we've covered some of during our time deep diving Quant Network. But yeah, that's about all we'll cover for CBC Casper for now, along with their highway consensus for the introduction. There's still a bit more to get into, like the switch from highway protocol to Zug protocol, which again, we'll be saving for the deep dive. But now we have a general understanding of what makes the Casper network unique. So let's do what we always do and look a little further into their operations. So there's another part to Casper. Obviously there's the Casper network itself, which is what we've spent the past little bit discussing. But then there's also Casper Labs. This is sort of their research lab, you could call it, and also the software team that actually builds out the Casper network. Just like how a lot of projects have a foundation to continue development for the project itself and assistance for other businesses looking to build on there. And then within the Casper Labs page, we can also find a bunch of news on their progress and potential upgrades they found, in addition to things they're working on and with. And then the Casper network is run by a Swiss nonprofit association called the Casper Association. And one of their main goals is to onboard and accept new validators into the network. But we'll talk about the foundation a bit more later on in the video. So now that we have a better understanding of Casper overall and their different counterparts, let's look into their team and some potential connections they've got in there. As always, we'll start off with the CEO and co-founder, which is Mrinal Manohar. So prior to his time founding Casper Labs, he's had quite an interesting list of experience. He managed to land some pretty massive names during his internship years, having worked at Oracle, Microsoft, and the FBI, which he was actually the project leader for a final project with the FBI during his time getting his master's in sciences. Then he joined Bain & Company as an associate from 2008 to 2010, and we've talked about Bain & Company before during some of our Morpheus Network coverage, as their team lead for logistics, Roger Crook, is also an advisor there. Bain & Company is one of the largest business consultancy firms in the world with nearly $6 billion in revenue. Then Mrinal spent 2 years at Bain Capital, which doesn't actually have direct business relations to Bain & Company, but rather Bain Capital was initially started up by many ex-Bain & Company members. So Bain & Company is a consultant firm, whereas Bain Capital is more of a private equity firm. He then spent 5 years as a principal for Sagard Holdings, which is another private equity management firm based in New York. And then after that, some more time as an angel investor for multiple tech and Web3 applications like Snapchat, Ethereum, Tezos, Maker, Filecoin, and Blockstacks, just to name a few. So clearly Mrinal has had quite a background in various sectors, from big tech companies like Oracle and Microsoft to even something like the FBI, and of course his connections to the world of enterprises along with private equity and finance during his time at Bain and his angel investing history. Not a bad background for a CEO for something the caliber of Casper Labs at all. There's definitely experience and connections in the large corporate world, along with some entrepreneurship and investor experience in the world of Web3. Next, let's move on to their Chief Technology Officer, Meta Parlikar. She initially joined Casper after looking for a big career switch from product management into more of a tech management role. Prior to her time at Casper Labs, she had spent about 25 years or so in a plethora of different positions, ranging from things like software engineering at Compass Learning to quality assurance for some other small and medium enterprises. As for some of her most notable positions, she was a senior manager for quality control at Adobe. And while for anyone unaware of what Adobe is, they're basically a software company for a variety of what you would call multimedia and creativity software products. They were the company that actually first invented PDF files. And while just about any mind maps and even some of my earlier videos that you guys see, especially on my Twitter and Instagram, those are all thanks to Adobe, specifically Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Premiere Pro. So yeah, Adobe is a pretty massive company, and I'm sure Meta really grew her network out there, getting to connect with companies from all over the world in various different sectors. Since, well, any big company with any form of social or online presence nowadays is probably a customer of Adobe in some way or form. Then she spent nearly a good 5.5 years at Avalara as their senior director, which is a software company that offers a really wide array of services, from things like taxes, license management, invoicing, certificate management, and much more. She had a long list of accomplishments there, with some of the most notable ones being halving customer resolution times and shaving off up to 90% of costs for certain operating expenses by integrating AWS and machine learning. And then she spent about 2 years at Pyrofex Corp as their program manager, and this probably isn't a firm many people have heard of. On their website, they say they're Utah Valley's first blockchain and crypto startup, and the network they've built is called Silvermint. So I guess one way you guys can see this to avoid any confusion is like how R3, the company, has their main DLT product, Corda. So Pyrofex is a pretty similar case from what it seems with Silvermint as their version of Corda. Well, not a direct copy version, but their own DLT product. And while I didn't look too much into what Silvermint does fundamentally, but their team seems pretty legit. Their core team is pretty much made of members who previously held some pretty important roles at places like Google, Microsoft, Oracle, etc. But yeah, after Pyrofex, she began her time at Casper Labs in late 2018, and seems like she hasn't looked back since. Then there's their Chief Marketing Officer, Michael Duback. He spent his fair share of time as an account director for various companies, with his most notable position likely being during his time at Ogilvy, which is a mass advertising company founded all the way back in the 1850s. During his time there, he climbed the ranks from managing director to CEO, and some of his most notable features included being the global business manager for IBM in places like North America, Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and African regions. And some of the prizes he was awarded with there were like the Gold Effies for IBM Smarter Planet and IBM Watson. And then he also worked alongside Samsung with their global B2B business and helped their revenue grow 3x in just 18 months. Some of the other clients on the list were like Coca-Cola, Holiday Inn, IHG Rewards, UPS, and a couple more. Then he joined Block V as their Chief Marketing Officer. Block V is actually a DLT project I've recently started looking a bit into. The TLDR for their project is that they're a platform building smart NFTs for real business use cases and enhancing the possibility of what digital goods can do. And yeah, I know a lot of you guys might be like, aren't hundreds of other projects in the space doing the same thing? Yes, there are tons of other projects building around expanding the possibilities of NFTs. That's a pretty broad term, and that's no secret by now. But the level of adoption these guys have had is pretty impressive from what I've seen. Some of their partners include Doritos, KFC, Vodafone, Verizon, Intel, Amex, Lacoste, Samsung, and the NBA, which really did it for me. As many of you guys know, I love the game of basketball, and so seeing a collaboration with the NBA really made me want to look further into this project. But yeah, this isn't a Block V video, so we'll do some further coverage of them later on in the near future, but back to our introduction to Casper. Some of the highlights Michael had during his time there was like working with Intel on a pilot program for IoT products, boosting fan engagement with Heineken, the LA Football Club, Sony, Goosebumps, and some other companies. Then he also played a role in Project Engage, which is another collaboration with Intel on various different retail solutions. And then he spent a year and a half at DermTech, which is a testing laboratories company listed on the NASDAQ. And then finally he made his way to Casper Labs in February of this year. They also have a long list of other important members around their team, ranging from members from business development, software engineering, marketing, and much more. And of course, we'll be going over these in the deep dive. But before we move on from their team, let's check out the Casper Association, which, as we covered, are the ones running the Casper Network as a non-profit association. And while the founding board is made of 3 members, there's Daniel Baisuz, Ralph Kubley, and Patrick Storchenegger, who's the chairman of the board, and the last member we'll be highlighting for the introduction. So Patrick has a pretty interesting background. He's kind of a law specialist starting out in PwC before starting up his own law firm called PST Legal and Consulting. But the highlight is really his experience in the DLT space. He served as an advisor for DIA, which is a blockchain oracle project that's got some ties to Alliance Block. And last but definitely not least, he's actually also one of the founding council members of the Energy Web Foundation. So pretty great to see someone with so much work around the legal space having such close ties to Casper and Energy Web. Both projects that we look pretty deep into, and well, as you guys know, we recently finished the Energy Web introduction, and the deep dive into Energy Web will probably be one of our next videos really soon. So now, moving on from their team, let's dive into some of their connections and collaborations. So we already mentioned their collaboration for tokenizing intellectual property for patents with IPWE. But that's just scratching the surface. They've got tons of other partnerships and connections to some very high-level industry players. Perhaps their most touted and notable partnership would be the collaborations with China's blockchain service network, which they finalized in a pretty unique way. Together, they minted and signed an agreement represented as a multi-sig NFT. Now, this partnership is going to have Casper make the open permission blockchain version of their network for the city of Fuzhou in China. So they'll be using an open, public, but permission form of Casper. And so this chain is probably going to be responsible for a lot of different things there, from logging digital IDs, public wallets, and probably a lot more credentials. So Casper is building this open permission blockchain adaptation on Casper, which will become Fuzhou's preferred blockchain for most of the services in that city. And well, we've seen the stance China has had on crypto as a whole. So seeing them sort of validate Casper in a sense could be pretty huge, to see Casper being one of the networks they're kind of alongside with. There's so much more to this partnership, which I personally believe to be one of the biggest for Casper, given that not many blockchain projects are partnered with entities in China to build out the Web3 and 4th Industrial Revolution infrastructure, as we know how they are when it comes to being a rather closed economy for the most part. Then they've also had some pretty close work with IBM for quite a bit now, ranging from things like joining the IBM Global Partner Program to building out hybrid networks as they presented at Blockchain Hub Davos this year. This was a cross-chain atomic swap of tokens between a private Hyperledger fabric with the Casper blockchain. And while this has a lot of potential to further open up closed private consortium DLTs and allow them to access the public open markets, which gives them the freedom to much deeper liquidity through Casper. And so the tech behind this was through using Casper Smart Contract Software Development Kit, TypeScript SDK, and Hyperledger Weaver, which is actually one of the Hyperledger modules in IBM's incubation program. And well, just on a side note, if anyone's watched the quant deep dive we've done a while back, you might remember the name Weaver being brought up. This is also one of the Hyperledger's products that they had confirmed would become, or well, now it's actually titled SATP compliant, which is the interoperability standard Quant's working on with MIT and the Internet Engineering Task Force to properly standardize the solution of interoperability of economic value through API gateways. But as we said, this wasn't presented at some small closed consortium or whatever. This was presented at Blockchain Hub Davos. For anyone unaware of what Davos is, we've covered some of Davos in the LCX Deep Dive. It's an alpine resort town in Switzerland, and the World Economic Forum holds an annual event titled Davos there, where they basically meet up and talk about a bunch of innovations around the world, whether it be things in fintech, IoT, genetic sciences, machine learning, AI, or whatever. Some of the biggest names are there every year, and it's definitely an event to keep an eye out on. So the Blockchain Hub Davos is sort of a separate event from the Davos itself that the World Economic Forum holds every year, though they're both supporting each other and basically running these events together at the same time. This event was actually co-hosted by CV, Crypto Valley Labs, and Casper Labs, which is saying quite a lot when you're co-hosting an event alongside the World Economic Forum. So while this isn't like directly from the World Economic Forum, they do play alongside an agreement to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And so it may as well be, as we've seen the World Economic Forum's role in pushing that agenda over the past years. This event was a huge success and saw some key speakers around the industry joining in the event, with some notable speeches like Shyam Nagarjan, who's a Hedera board of director and an executive for IBM on blockchain, metaverse, Web3, and sustainability, where he talked about how we can leave it up to IBM to suck all the fun out of NFTs, as they bring all the boring use cases like intellectual property, patents, analyst reports, and more of that sorts. So good to see there was some humor in the atmosphere at an event of this size. And additionally, there were more IBM members there, such as Nitin Gaur, who was the Director of Financial Sciences and Digital Assets for IBM, but he's since moved to the Global Head of Digital Assets at State Street. So yeah, great to see some even further collaborations between IBM and Casper Labs presenting at a World Economic Forum event. Rashid Ajaja, the CEO of Alliance Block, who I also recently interviewed, made an appearance at Blockchain Hub Davos too. He had quite a nice little panel about how NFTs could be used as a standard to accelerate the adoption of decentralized technologies as a whole, thanks to the immutable ability of blockchains to verify those credentials. One of the attendants at this event that really stood out in the lineup was Eva Kaili, who just took on the role as Vice President of the European Parliament back in the start of this year in January 2022. And before that, she was still working very closely within the EU Parliament, where she was the chair for science and technology for 5 years, while also later on being moved to the chair for artificial intelligence. Needless to say, quite an accomplishment anytime you get to work that closely within the Parliament, especially in such innovative fields. Then the last speaker we'll be highlighting from Blockchain Hub Davos for today will be Jesse Morris from the Energy Web Foundation. If you guys have been following my work recently, you'd know just how bullish and excited I am for the overall Energy Web ecosystem lately, as we keep looking through their connections and operations. So at Davos, Jesse spoke mainly on the topics around decentralized energy and net zero carbon emissions, and digital identities and identifiers, with how that can play a key role in the transition to fully validating the use and consumption of clean and renewable energies. And of course, there were many other speakers here, such as our very own Mrinal Manohar and Meta Parlikar from Casper Labs, and others within standard-setting bodies and Fortune 500 corporations. Moving on, they've also got a cool little partnership with BlockV, which is the same company the Chief Marketing Officer Michael Dubak was previously Chief Marketing Officer for as well. And so we mentioned a bit about BlockV during our time covering Michael earlier. This partnership actually consists of both BlockV and Smart Media Technologies, where they'll be offering smart NFTs that offer a self-serve, no-code functionality to allow any user within the Web3 ecosystem to deploy BlockV-powered smart NFTs. And of course, these NFTs will be launched on the Casper Network. BlockV and Casper then showcased these smart NFTs at the Under the Big Top at Consensus event in Austin, Texas, where they had the audience join in for an augmented reality treasure hunt for NFT treasure chests and other dynamic rewards. But while we're on the topic of smart NFTs and just overall NFTs with real utility beyond digital art, I just gotta let you guys know real quick about my collaboration with Galileo Protocol, which is not only the first public community project building on Quant's Overledger, but is tying real-world tangible assets to NFTs. If you guys want to hear more about the utility, I'll link the interview I did with them right up here. But basically, this partnership between Galileo and I means that for every Nebula NFT you buy using my code Tokenicer, you not only get 5% off, but you'll actually get to earn a chance to win one of my 8 mind maps as a physical NFT, meaning you could keep the digital form of that mind map or redeem it for a printed poster version of one of these maps. I really love the idea of NFTs overall, and to be able to play a role in growing the use cases of it beyond digital art to this concept of distributing intellectual property, kind of like what Casper is doing with IPWE. So if you guys are interested in grabbing a Nebula NFT to either test your luck at winning some sick prizes, or just want a chance to win one of my mind maps, the link to Galileo's PNFTs will be right down below. But now back to the Casper introduction. The last little connection we'll touch up on for today will be some of their connections and collaborations with Hyperledger. We already mentioned a bit of what's going on with them and Hyperledger Weaver thanks to the collaboration with IBM, but there's a bit more to this. And I'm sure you guys have probably guessed by now, but yes, Casper is indeed one of the members within the Hyperledger Foundation these days, alongside plenty of other utility networks we regularly discuss around here. So the general goal of this collaboration is to further develop the possibilities of hybrid applications and communities. There seems to be a lot of talks between both the core members of Casper and Hyperledger to find synergy through interoperability between the plethora of products Hyperledger offers like Fabric to connect to Casper's open and permissionless protocol as seen here. And then overall, just more talks of cross-chain transactions between a private permission network and Casper, while also sharing the research and resources they have alongside each other to help accelerate the growth and adoption of enterprise-grade blockchain utilities. And just about any time a project joins the Hyperledger ecosystem and manages to find some synergy for collaboration to expand on the operations of industry-grade DLT, that's usually a really good sign in terms of what a project has to offer. So really excited to see the continued development Casper has with, of course, all of their partners, but especially what comes out of their work with Hyperledger and IBM, being that those two are two industry leaders when it comes to enterprise blockchains. But now that we've looked into some of their key connections, let's take a look into the overall tokenomics and token utility of the CSPR token. As Casper Network is a layer 1 network, you guys have probably figured out by now that the CSPR token is the native token that fuels the network, much like most layer 1s. So starting off, much like most proof-of-stake networks, CSPR is used as a stake to secure the network. So with the staking, you can simply do it within the Casper wallet and stake your tokens onto a validator node of your choosing. So the annual inflation rate for Casper is at 8%. But luckily the staking from Casper also gives out an 8% APY. So if you're staking, you're pretty much unaffected by the inflation rate. One rather interesting fact about CSPR and the Casper network is that each transaction on the network will cost 0.1 CSPR as the fee, and each transaction needs to be at minimum 2.5 CSPR or more. And at the time of creating this video, 1 CSPR is about 2.6 cents in US dollars, meaning that each transaction would have to be about 5 US cents or more, which I'd argue is a fairly reasonable threshold for the most part, as I'd imagine most transactions, especially within their enterprise environment, would be sending transactions that hold hopefully at least a little more value than 5 cents. So the reason they don't have a total cap unlike most crypto assets is actually pretty interesting. There's two main reasons. Inflation will incentivize users to utilize their assets to stake or pay for other functions on the network. Much like how during times of high inflation with fiat currencies, it's best to spend your fiat on things that will outpace the growth of inflation. And also, as the Casper network has some fixed features like 0.1 CSPR in fees and a minimum of 2.5 CSPR, the token value doesn't come from its scarcity like Bitcoin per se, but rather the actual utility of the CSPR token on the Casper network, which makes sense to why they would want to incentivize consumption of the utility rather than hoarding and hodling. So at the launch of mainnet, the total supply of CSPR was at 10 billion. But of course, due to its 8% annual inflation, it's a little closer to 11.3 billion now, with 10.6 billion or so in circulation. Overall, I'd say the tokenomics of CSPR are pretty self-explanatory, especially for anyone who's been familiar with proof-of-stake networks before. Its core feature is to be used as a stake to secure the network, while also offsetting the inflation rate by literally incentivizing users and protecting them from the inflation doing so, and of course as the fuel of the Casper network for small microservice fees. Simple, yet very effective and easily understandable. But that's about all we've got for our introduction into the Casper network, and now just to wrap it up with my final thoughts. I think Casper is a very promising Layer 1 project. They definitely have some very interesting history with the initial Ethereum Foundation, and most notably with Vlad Zamfir and his origins of CBC Casper. And then of course Casper finalizing that and building the what's considered pinnacle of proof of stake in their network consensus, giving it a much stronger scaling level of finality and overall security in reaching consensus as a network. Then, of course, the partnerships they formed show a lot of promise when you're working so closely with names like IBM, the World Economic Forum, Hyperledger, and of course, even getting to help build out the open permission blockchain adapter with BSN in China. Definitely some exciting things brewing up. The team's background also reflects quite a similar caliber of profession and experience, with the core founding members work at some large Fortune 500s like IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, Adobe, Intel, the Energy Web ecosystem, and of course, various government entities. The fact alone that they had the opportunity to host a World Economic Forum Davos event on blockchain with some huge members there speaking on some really innovative ideas is already massive in itself, let alone working and presenting so closely with industry leaders up on the stage. And while the tokenomics on CSPR aren't something that completely blows me out of the water, they are definitely solid and make a bunch of sense, especially with the incentivization for users to actually utilize their CSPR in a variety of ways rather than just the usual HODL, right? Alright, but that's about all we've got for our introduction to Casper. As usual, I hope everyone got some great value out of this, whatever it may be. And if you did, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe while turning that ringer on so you don't miss a thing. Along with, of course, checking out Tokenicer.network to fuel your hunger for research even further. From my Medium articles, Spotify podcasts, Twitter threads, YouTube videos, interviews, and much more, that can all be found on Tokenicer.network, and of course, that's right down in the description below. But until next time, guys, be sure to stay safe and keep learning. And I hope everyone had a great holiday. I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.